When ES6 version of JavaScript was introduced in 2015, it was the biggest update to the JavaScript language ever. And with the release of ES6, some new enhancements were also introduced in the way we create objects in JavaScript using object literal syntax. And in this lecture, we are going to talk about some of those enhancements which has been introduced for object literal syntax. So here, as you can see, I have two variables called address, which is storing an array, and I also have this contact variable, which is storing an object with email and phone number. Now here we also have a user object, which we have created using object literal syntax. And for this user object, I have the name property, I have the age property, and I have the gender property. Now for this user object, I also want to have an address property. Okay, and to this address property, I want to assign this address array. Okay, now if I go ahead and if I log this user object and if I save the changes, you will see for that user object we have name, age, gender, and we have address. And this address is assigned with an array because the address variable which we are assigning here to this address property, it is storing that array. Now, with the release of ES6, there is an enhancement with the way in which we assign a variable to a property. So if the property name and the variable which we are assigning to that property, if both are same, then we do not need to do the explicit assignment. We can simply omit this assignment from here. And JavaScript is smart enough to understand that to this address property, we want to assign the value stored in this address variable. If I save the changes here, you will see that we still have the address property, which is storing an array, basically this array. So here we are not doing explicit assignment. Instead, since the property name and the variable name which we want to assign to that property both have the same name, JavaScript will do implicit assignment. It will assign the value stored in this variable to this address property. In the same way, here I can simply go ahead and use a comma. And then in the same way, I also want to have a contact property. And to this contact property, I want to assign this contact object. And again, since the name is same, we do not have to do explicit assignment. If I go ahead and if I save the changes, you will see that a contact property is created and that is assigned with this contact object. So here again an implicit assignment has happened. Since the property name and the variable which we want to assign to that property both has the same name, JavaScript has done implicit assignment. We can also achieve this for simple types. For example, let's say we have this is married property which is storing a value true, and for the user object also we want to have the is married property, and to that I want to assign the value stored in this is married variable. And since both have the same name, the property name and the variable name which we want to assign to this property both has the same name, we do not need to do explicit assignment. If I save the changes, now for each user object you will also see this is married property which is assigned with the value true, because this is married variable, it is assigned with the value true. So this is one enhancement in object literal syntax. If the property name and the variable name whose value we want to assign to that property both have the same name, we do not need to do explicit assignment. JavaScript will take care of assigning the value of that variable to that property implicitly. Another enhancement is, earlier when we were creating a method in an object, what we were doing, we were specifying a property, for example, calculate age, and to that we were assigning an anonymous function like this, right? And here we can write the function body. Now here I'm not interested in writing the function body, but what I want to show here is, earlier before ES6 when we were creating a method on an object, we were creating a property, and to that we were assigning an anonymous function. But from ES6 we can simply create a method like calculate age and like this. Okay, we don't need to use any function keyword, or we don't need to do any assignment or anything like that. Here we have created a method called calcAge. This method can also take some parameters, for example, birth year. Okay, and if you want to specify more parameters, you can specify that. But this is how we can create a method now. And inside this, you can write the method body. So this is new way of creating methods for an object. This is another change. And the next change is we can also create properties dynamically. So far, we have been specifying a name for the property like this. But let's say you want to create a property dynamically. For that, you can use a set of square brackets, and inside this square bracket, you can write any JavaScript expression to create a property. So for example, here I can say 2 plus 2 or 2 plus 3. So a property will be created with the result of this expression, and to that I'm going to assign maybe 5. So if I save the changes now, and if I expand this, you will see we have a property called 5, which is assigned with the string value 5. Here I can also use, let's say I use an address array here. We have this address array, right? So I'm using that address array, and I want to use its first element as the property name. So I'll pass 0 to get the first element from the address array. And if I save the changes, we should have a new property called London, which should be assigned with this value 5. If I expand that, you will see that we have a new property called London, which is assigned with this value 5. So in this way, we can also create dynamic properties for an object by using the square brackets like this. And inside that, we can write any JavaScript expression to create a property for an object. This is another enhancement with object literal syntax. So these are few enhancements which has been introduced for object literal syntax in ES6 version of JavaScript. And from now on, whenever we are going to use the object literal syntax to create an object, we are going to use these features. So this is all I wanted to cover in this lecture. If you have any questions from this lecture, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.